Hey everybody, and welcome to a very special video. This time we're going to talk about something very near and dear to my heart, and that is all the retro games that I associate with the Christmas holidays. Now before we get into it, there's something I want to explain. As some of you guys know, I live in Europe, in the Balkans, in a country called the Republic of Macedonia, or as it has recently been renamed to North Macedonia. Now we're a Slavic country and primarily Orthodox Christian, meaning that we celebrate Christmas on January the 7th, and Christmas Eve, or Kolede as we call it, is on January the 6th. Christmas here is strictly a religious holiday. So all the gift giving and Santa, we do that, but we do that on New Year's. So when I say Christmas holidays, I actually mean New Year's holidays, as we call them here. But in order to relate to you better, I'm going to refer to them as Christmas holidays. So in this video we're going to cover all sorts of interesting games that were available in the early 90s and a little bit from the 80s here in my country. And even though the games I played as a kid aren't all that different from the games you guys played over there in the first world, there are some things that I think you're going to find quite surprising. From out-of-region games to bootleg games and some European exclusive games, I think you're going to enjoy this one. So keep watching and let's dive in together into what I consider Christmas games for myself. They're not necessarily Christmas-themed games, but they are games that I personally associate with this time of year. Now, in the early 90s, Famiclone systems and games started coming to Macedonia in droves. Now, these are basically clones of the Japanese NES, the Famicom. At first, these games and consoles would be sold in tech and computer stores, but as soon as the SEGA Mega Drive and SNES started being more common here, entire video game stores would open up in many places in my city and many other towns and cities in Macedonia. Now, I got my first Famiclone in the winter of 1992 or early 1993. I had just won some art competition and the reward was some money. Just enough for me to buy a Famicom or Famiclone, or as we used to call them, Nintendo. So when the press asked me, what are you going to buy with your reward money? I simply said, a Nintendo. Now, at the time, most people still didn't really know what this was. But soon they would become very popular. The first cartridge I got with my system, because it didn't have built-in games, now this is the time before Famiclones came with built-in games, was a 32-in-1 cartridge. I will forever associate these strange bootleg multi-cards and their menus and all these weird early Famicom games with the holidays and with winter in general. There's something very mysterious about them. The sense of discovery on these cartridges is just something that it's a gift that keeps on giving. Sure enough, many of these cartridges would have repeating games later on, but initially the first batches of multi-cards, they actually had unique games and very good, very high-quality games. And most of these games were actually early 80s Famicom games that never really released outside Japan, so we had something that was very common here that never came out in the rest of Europe officially, or even in the US. And one such game that I dearly love and always associate with the holidays is Binary Land. And this was a very beautiful game that I loved a lot as a kid and I still love it to this day. Now, speaking of Japan exclusive games, thanks to the fact that these games that were sold here are actually Chinese bootlegs, we had many games that were exclusive to Japan that would be sold here in bootleg form that many people in my part of the world and in the developing world in general, in the Slavic world, hold strong nostalgia for. Games that were simply not officially released in the rest of Europe, much less in the US. From Kid Dracula to Samurai Pizza Cats. We actually had the Samurai Pizza Cats show air on TV. Thanks to satellite TV, we had just about everything here. To Don Doko Don 2, we had it all. And it's hard not to associate so many of these games with winter and the New Year's, or rather Christmas holidays as you guys call them. Especially when many of these games would often be New Year's gifts for many kids here in Macedonia and the developing world. Back in the 80s and 90s, about a week or two before New Year's, in my city at least, in Skopje, we have this fair-like event where a bunch of stalls would be placed on the street leading up to the main city square and on the square itself. And on these stalls, people would sell all kinds of amazing toys and gadgets and New Year's decorations. And in the early 90s, video games, especially Famiclone video games, would be sold as well. Now, most of the time we'd just buy these games based on the artwork alone, but some of these stalls would have small portable TVs for us to test and play the games on. It was at one of these stalls that I would buy the bootleg version of Aladdin, the SNES to NES port, and it's an absolutely incredible port. At the time I already had the SNES Aladdin, but I still found the NES or the Famiclone Aladdin downright fascinating. We'll talk about that game in a future review. I bought the game on a whim, I didn't know what to expect, and when I brought it home, I was beyond amazed with what I got. So of course I'm always going to associate this game with the holidays. Now in another part of town, around this time of year, there would be a proper fair. And at this fair, many of the video game stores would have their own booths where you could actually test games out. They'd have a couple of CRT TVs and consoles out for you to not only test the games but also the consoles, and it was just incredible. So from the classic licensed games like DuckTales 2 and Chip and Dale to Flintstone Surprise the Dinosaur Peak to all kinds of Japan exclusive titles that were unknowingly to us were never actually released in Europe or the US. Games that by their nature are very whimsical, very beautiful. It's very hard for me to not associate them with the holiday season, especially when we buy most of these games during this time of year. Speaking of Japan exclusives again, one of my absolutely favorite Christmas games is a game that we simply knew as the game with the froggy. We couldn't even read the title of the game because it's Japanese, and that is Kero Keroppi no Daibouken 2. So Keroppi's adventure, I guess, I don't know whatever it means, is one of the most whimsical and beautiful NES platformers, and it's an exceptionally easy game until you hit a wall where you have to know Japanese to progress. But when you're a kid, that comes a little later in the game, so you're still having a ton of fun by that point in the game. Another game that I think it's basically a Christmas game with how beautiful it is Don Doko Don 2. Now, Don Doko Don 2, there were two versions of this game sold in my country. One of them, the one that came later, was a hack and a sprite replacement with Mario characters. The original Don Doko Don 2, which was still known as Mario Bros. 8, Don Doko Don 2, would simply have the original characters without any alterations. Now, this is one of the most beautiful platformers on the NES that sadly never officially released anywhere in Europe or the US. And yet, in the developing world, we had it and we cherish it and love it and have fond memories of it as if it was an officially released game over here. Most people don't even know that the games we were buying are bootlegs, and I've said this many times. Many people to this day tell me that these are the original Nintendo games, and I cannot convince them otherwise. They don't believe that these games were bootlegs. It's such a shame that Kirby wasn't available on Famiclone cards, otherwise it would have been one of my favorite Christmas games growing up. But what we did have was a very whimsical and wonderful game, and that is Mickey Mouse 3. This is another Japanese game, but it's not a Japanese exclusive game entirely, because the US did get this game in the form of Kid Clown. However, in my opinion, Kid Clown and all the characters associated with that failed franchise are a disaster. Now, the Japanese version of this game, Mickey Mouse 3, is an absolutely wonderful and very whimsical game that many people from my part of the world hold dear and have fond memories of. Of course, there's the Aladdin port and a very special game that was exceptionally popular in arcades in Macedonia, and that is Snow Bros. Now, Snow Bros did get a US and a European release, and yes, I'd say Snow Bros is a Christmas-themed game, and it's a wonderful one. Hands down, one of the best Christmas-themed games, arcade games, that has ever been made. And not only did we get the NES version here, but thanks to bootleg games, we also had the Japanese exclusive SEGA Mega Drive version of the game, which was, of course, also very popular. In fact, the SEGA Mega Drive game, now I don't have that cartridge anymore, but it would come on a 3-in-1 cartridge often with Sonic 1, Doraemon, and the third game was Snow Bros. For the SEGA Mega Drive. Now, the SEGA Mega Drive is a system that I often associate with summer due to its arcade nature and the arcade nature of the games it has. And we're going to discuss arcade games and the history of arcade games in Macedonia in another video when summer comes along. But there are some games that I definitely associate with the holiday season. One such game, as I already said, is the SEGA Mega Drive version of Snow Bros. It's an absolutely wonderful version of the game, and it's probably even better than the arcade version in my opinion. Although I think the NES version might be slightly better. We also enjoyed many bootleg games on the SEGA Mega Drive regardless of region. However, as I said, they are mostly summer games for me. But that doesn't mean that their SEGA Mega Drive lacks in whimsical and beautiful games. Other than the obligatory Disney games it has, one of the most memorable video games on the system that I always associate with the holidays is Restore. Probably because this is the time of year when I accidentally discovered the game and rented it out for the first time, and I was just mesmerized by it. Every level, every moment in the game is just so incredibly beautiful that even though it's a slightly late Mega Drive release, I consider it as one of my favorite games of my childhood, or rather I should say early teen years at this point. But it's not just Restore and Snow Bros. Sonic 3 is a game that I generally associate with summer and with arcades, and we're going to talk about that in our video. However, by the time I reached Carnival Night Zone and Ice Cap Zone, it was already winter, and especially this time of year, the holidays. Now, I clearly remember that the day when I finally got past that accursed barrel in the Carnival Night Zone was actually either the 1st or January the 2nd, that New Year's when I got the game. So it was 1994, at the end of 1994 and beginning of 1995, I believe. So I will always associate these two levels of the game with the winter holidays, and they're the perfect levels to associate with this time of year. But the most whimsical, most beautiful, most incredible game on the SEGA Mega Drive is World of Illusion Mickey Mouse. This game was simply designed to be a Disney cartoon. This game is the best Christmas game you could ever buy a child from the early 90s, or even, I believe, even now. Every level of the game, the transitions between levels in the game, everything is just so magical, so incredible, so whimsical, so perfect for the holidays that I don't know what to say. It's just the best game to play around this time of year. And I will always associate this game with the most magical time of year. There's no other way around it. It's just such a perfect title. From its music to its visuals, art direction, everything about this game is simply pure perfection. And yeah, the controls are a little bit wonky, but I don't care. It's a very easy game, it's a very forgiving game, and best of all, it's a very magical game. The perfect game to play during the holidays. Now we can't forget about the SNES because that too has so many incredible whimsical games. The SNES has the Magical Quest series of Mickey Mouse games, and while they're not as amazing as World of Illusion on SEGA Mega Drive, they definitely have better music. So these games many of us associate with the holiday season, especially when SNES games here were rather more expensive than Sega Mega Drive and Famiclone games, so when you get an SNES game as a gift, you really cherish that one. The Magical Quest series of games on Mickey Mouse, unfortunately we only got the first two games and we never got the best one in the series, and that is the third installment that is a Japan exclusive. And I don't remember if the third installment was even sold here as a bootleg, because while we did have many bootleg SNES games, due to the nature of the system, some never made it here. From the incredible Pop and Twinbee series, such as the Shmup and Rainbow Bell Adventure, to the Disney games, the SNES was chock full of whimsical games, and even the first-party titles such as Kirby and Super Mario. This is the perfect system to play during the holidays, with its amazing music and unique visual style. It's very interesting to say that I personally associate the Pop and Twinbee games with Christmas a lot, because one of the most popular games here in Macedonia for the SNES was actually the Shmup of Pop and Twinbee. The reason for that being that there was this TV show where kids would compete in video games, and one of the main games that was played on the TV show back then was Pop and Twinbee. So many kids would buy the game to practice at home just because they simply found it to be beautiful and loved playing it. Every scene, every moment of this game is some kind of beautiful and whimsical. The same goes for Rainbow Bell Adventure, where we got a simplified version of it compared to Japan, here in Europe. And honestly, I prefer the European version of the game because I like linear games more than whatever the Japanese version is. It's more similar to a Metroidvania, I guess, with multiple exits of each level and so on. So while we did get a cut-down version, I like this one better. And these are two games that for me are purely Christmas games, even though they're not necessarily Christmas themed. They're just so amazing. I love these games with all my heart. And don't even get me started on how amazing the SNES Aladdin is. I love the Sega Mega Drive Aladdin as well, but the SNES Aladdin is just such a perfect game for this time of year. The music sounds like something straight out of a Christmas cartoon. The visuals are, I don't know, they're like claymation or something. There's something so unique and so perfect for this time of year. Now, at the time, I didn't have a Game Boy, and I didn't buy a Game Boy simply because I remember looking at it, and many kids at school had them, and they would bring them over to school to play. And I didn't buy one because I honestly couldn't see anything on the device. But what I did find in one of these New Year's stalls at the town square was a Tetris handheld, specifically this Apollo handheld right here, with 12 games in one. Now, I wasn't a big fan of Tetris until then. I didn't particularly care about the game much, but I found this particular handheld and they became a huge thing here in Macedonia, Tetris handhelds. God, they were exceptionally popular in the early and mid-90s. So, this game had 12 games in it. Most of them were Tetris variants, but Two or three of them were actually shmups. And I found that downright fascinating. Not only that, but I could actually see this screen, unlike the Game Boy screen at the time. So I promptly bought this, and it not only made me love Tetris, but I also had a lot of fun with the other games in it. This was also my first time playing Snake. I mean, I had played arcade versions of Snake, rather the games that Snake is based on, such as Jungler and whatever that one other game with snakes was in a maze. But this time was the very first time I would play Snake, and to this day I consider the Apollo version of Snake to be the best version of Snake. And of course I will always associate Tetris, and specifically this version of Tetris on the Apollo, on the handhelds, with the holiday season. So you guys may be wondering, what about the time before the SNES, before the Mega Drive, before the NES, or rather Famiclone? Well, then did we not have video games then? Oh, we sure did. For one, during the 80s, arcades were absolutely flourishing here in Macedonia, but that's a topic for another time because I associate arcade games with the summer. And we also had home computers such as the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum, Atari 2600 games. However, as we saw in a previous video I made on Commodore 64 and Atari 2600 games, they're not the most whimsical and festive games out there, and I definitely don't associate them with Christmas and the Christmas holidays. What I do associate with this time of year are LCD games. Now, LCD games are not very popular anymore, and they're not very well loved. However, I adore them. The very first video games I ever got when I was 4 or 5 years old for New Year's were LCD games. One was Donkey Kong 2, the original Game & Watch, and the other is Tronica's Space Adventure. These games are the very first video games I ever owned. And there's a story behind them too. When I was very little, I saw some kids outside playing the colored Donkey Kong Jr. game. I think it was the handheld version, not the tabletop version. And I fell in love with it. And I kept asking my mom, what is this? And she was like, this is a video game. It's like the arcades you go to, or flippers as we call them, but it's a video game for your home. And she said, it's a video game with monkeys. And I wanted that monkey video game more than anything. Now, that year, my parents tried to find it, my grandparents, my parents, my aunt, they tried to find this game, but they couldn't find it here. But thanks to my uncle Emil, who already had Donkey Kong 2 and Tronica's Space Adventure, he decided to give me his games. So that one New Year's morning, I wake up, and what do I find under the New Year's tree? I find Donkey Kong 2 and Space Adventure. Now, initially I was a little disappointed that my monkey game did not have color, but that disappointment quickly turned to joy when I realized that it was just such a fun game, and in fact it was way more fun than the one, in my opinion at least, than the one the kids played outside, the colored one. That one was way more difficult, and this one was just so perfect. And it had 2 screens to boot. So these 2 games I will always cherish as one of my most important holiday New Year's games of all time. And I just love playing them around this time of year. I just always worry that these are going to die. My original Donkey Kong and Space Adventure are long gone, but I managed to replace them over the years. And if I have to replace them once again, if these units die as well, I will. We also got many Soviet games here. We had both original Game & Watch games, all sorts of random unlicensed LCD games, and what I really find fascinating is we also had many of the Soviet knockoff games, such as, for example, Nintendo's Egg or Mickey Mouse would be Nu Pogodi here in the Slavic world. And there are many variants of it, even sci-fi variants. Nintendo's Fire was Space Bridge, which in my opinion is a lot more fun than Fire because it has better artwork and it's sci-fi theme. LCD games would be sold here throughout the 90s and even early 2000s. And they're games that you'd often find on these stalls I was talking about earlier. so it's very hard not to associate them with winter and the Christmas holidays. But we also associate them with summer and summer vacation because more often than not we'd buy them during summer vacation. They were very cheap, they were very affordable, so it was easy to just shut us kids up and buy us some random LCD game for a while. LCD games hold a very special place in my heart. It was just an incredible time to be alive where we had all these unique pick up and play, easy to just get into and play games back then. I just love LCD games. I also love VFD games, but we're going to talk about those in the summer videos. VFD games are summer games. They're not winter games. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed what I had to show you and what I had to say about the games that I associate with the Christmas holidays. We're going to talk more about the history of video games in the Republic of Macedonia in future videos. So until then, stay tuned because I'm gonna keep posting my regular reviews of bootleg games, of regular games and so on. And every once in a while, when I have some more time, I'm gonna put together videos that cover the history of video games in my country, similar to this one. So I guess, I don't know what you're supposed to say at the end of a video like this. I guess see you next time or something. Well, that's about it.